David Lammy, welcome to Acting Prime Minister, and thank you for welcoming us into your office this afternoon. A disclaimer before we start, you are actually my MP.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So I think we should just do a little bit of a plug for Tottenham, right?
Okay, absolutely.
Creative, diverse, vibrant.
The home of artists like Adele have come out of Tottenham.
Yeah.
And actually, I think the other thing people don't realise is it's just rows and rows and rows of lots of residential housing.
Mm-hmm.
It actually hasn't got some of the sort of tower blocks that people imagine
True.
that exist in other parts of London. So it's quite a, there's quite a sense of community in Tottenham, whatever your background.
And the new stadium.
And the new stadium, which is huge, massive, impressive, fantastic. We are going to create the Tottenham Tourism Board. That's what I've decided.
Okay, so that's going to be your first task as Prime Minister.
Okay, great.
But let's talk about what else you might do. So I just want you to imagine that you've been promoted from this office into Downing Street for the next 20 minutes, half an hour. You walk through that door. Firstly, is it something you've ever imagined? Have you ever envisaged yourself as Prime Minister? Have you ever wondered what it might be like or whether you'd like to do it?
Well, of course, like most MPs, when you want to be an MP, there is a moment, a private, intimate moment, where you're standing, usually with a hairbrush, in front of the mirror, practicing the speech that you would give when you walk into number 10, and I would be lying if I said that I hadn't done that. But I think that the truth is, these days, I sort of think, I mean, I don't sort of think, I definitely think that if you spend your time aspiring to be Home Secretary, Education Secretary, Prime Minister, whatever it is, usually it means that you make these silly compromises along the way. Usually it means that you spend too much time trying to crawl up someone's backside, if I can say that. And actually, we're living in an age where the currency is being authentic to yourself and speaking your own truth. And so I am way more preoccupied with that. What then comes as a consequence of that, is up to the people. But I have to say, I feel empowered, strengthened. I've been in this game a long time now, so I just don't spend my time thinking about what job I want to get.
That must be quite liberating, right?
Very
because
liberating.
You did run for Mayor of London. I mean, you obviously do have political ambitions, but now you can, be yourself on the backbenches, campaign for the things you really care about without any constraints.
Absolutely. So I have this huge kind of social media profile now. I actually do feel that I'm able to affect change both with the government and within my own party, and I can't tell you how liberating it is not to be in anyone's pocket, and I'm pretty determined to remain independent-minded and able to speak truth to power and not be looking for favours from anybody else.
So does that mean if you were offered a job in the Shadow Cabinet, for example, tomorrow, you would turn it down?
I don't think I'm going to be offered a job in the Shadow Cabinet at the moment because I obviously have been leading the People Vote campaign, and I think that it would be a problem if I was somehow limited in what I could say, and I think probably Jeremy's team know that. So I would turn it down on the basis that I have to be free to speak my mind, and I think that there are too many tensions at the moment, which would limit my ability to do that outside the Labour Party and outside the whip.
Anyway, you're Prime Minister right now anyway, so
I'm Prime Minister.
You can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
So first things first, when you get into Downing Street, there'll be a few things you've got to deal with. The phone's ringing off the hook because world leaders want to speak to the new Prime Minister of Britain. Which world leader would you love to speak to first?
I think I would speak to the biggest grown-up in the room, and I think the biggest grown-up on the international scene has got to be Angela Merkel.
Okay.
Germany is a big powerhouse of a country. It is successful. It's hugely important here in Europe. I think that she has the experience to navigate world affairs. She is very conscious of what Russia's up to in the East. She is very conscious of the position of America. She's a very important ally of this country. It seems to me Angela Merkel has got to be first. And I think she's been brave for a politician who's on the centre-right of the political spectrum on issues like immigration. So Angela Merkel, for sure.
What about President Trump? Would you pick up to him for a start?
I mean, look, I think that I would have a very frosty relationship with Trump. I certainly wouldn't be glad handing him like Theresa May have. I would not be rolling out the carpet to him. I would want to communicate very powerfully, actually, that this is not about hostility to the American people, and it is not about the greatest traditions of America, which I adore and love. I studied there, I've worked there, but I would want to be allies of many Americans who feel let down by Trump. And I'd want to send very powerful messages to Trump that some of the alliances he's forging with the far right across the world, and the way he's talking, he described just recently asylum seekers as animals. I mean, this is, I'm afraid, is totally beyond the pale.
Because a lot of people are willing to compromise a little bit on what they believe in order to maintain a good relationship with America. I mean, they sort of argue we have this special relationship and that holds no matter who's in that office. But for you, you would take a point of principle and say, actually, no, I'm willing to be a bit frosty with the American president.
Look, there are moments internationally when countries go a different way. I remember when President Chirac, I think it was, took a different view on the Iraq War. I remember that we took a different position, I think it was Wilson and Lyndon Johnson or Ford in relation to Vietnam. So look, the relationship continues because presidents and prime ministers come and go, but in the end, the values that you're standing for, the values that you believe in, the best of your values, integrity, honesty, transparency, accountability, selflessness, leadership, I'm afraid those have to be values that you stand up for, and I'm afraid they're not seen in Donald Trump.
Okay, next task, you've got to appoint your own cabinet. You can have anyone you want from history. They don't have to be politicians. They can be anyone you want. Just a couple of names. Who would you love to have in your cabinet, do you think?
Oh, big names. I think I'd have Roy Jenkins.
Okay, yeah, interesting.
I think he'd make a great foreign secretary. He had a very expansive understanding of European integration.
Left the Labour Party though,
so
you're happy to have someone who's not necessarily
Labour. He
Labour.
left the Labour Party, but I've said, look, no political tradition. Look at Anna Soubry; she's just left the Tories. I think that's a bit of bold move. So, what Roy Jenkins also gave us was the Race Relations Act. So I think he'd be a great foreign secretary. I remember Dennis Healey when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Barbara Castle would have to be in there, and people like Jenny Lee, who invented the Open University. She'd make a wonderful education secretary.
Yeah, that's a really interesting lineup. There'll be some immediate issues on your desk as well as Prime Minister to deal with in terms of affairs on the agenda. Firstly, Brexit, of course. And we couldn't have you on this podcast without talking about Brexit because you have been such a strong campaigner for a second referendum right from the start, really, haven't you? If you were the Prime Minister and you could do anything you wanted to do, would you just revoke Article 50, just cancel Brexit? You could do.
I wouldn't just cancel Brexit. I mean, obviously, me, David Lammy, there's a big part of me that would like to cancel Brexit and revoke it. I would only revoke it in the circumstances where we were heading for no deal, which I do think would be catastrophic for too many people in the country. But no, I have campaigned for this to be put back to the people. And the reason I believe that is because, very simply, when some people voted Remain, that was very straightforward. They knew what they were doing. When we get to the Leave campaign, there were lots of different versions of Leave. If you're someone who wants to leave with no deal, I don't think that was put to the people. That needs to be put back to the people. If you're someone who wants to leave in a customs union, well, that means that we wouldn't be able to strike independent trade deals. It seems to me that's got to be put back to the people. And if you want a Norway-type deal, we would be a complete rule taker, unable to make the rules of the EU, but we'd be very close to it. I think that has to be put back to people. So on any analysis, if you voted Leave, you need a final say. Do you like the deal that emerges, or do you want to remain? And that's what I'd be fighting for.
I mean, you've campaigned passionately on this issue for a long time, and passions run high in politics right now. And as Prime Minister, people are going to pick over your language and ask you about things you said in the past. And one thing you said recently in a speech was you seemed to sort of compare the ERG, the Brexiteer wing of the Conservative Party, to Nazi Germany and to apartheid. Do you regret the language that you used there?
Not at all. Not at all. I said, look, let us not appease this hard right takeover of actually a very noble party, and that's the Conservative Party. And let's face it, there are Conservatives, many Conservatives, both in history and now, who do not recognise what these people are doing to their party.
Is it fair to compare them, though, to Nazis?
In the same way,
that's quite strong.
No, I said let's not appease them. So in the same way that Churchill did not appease Hitler and the far-right takeover of Europe, I'm not prepared to appease them. And let me just say, and I say this with a lot of integrity, I'm sitting here as one of the few black men in the British Parliament. I take it extremely seriously when Jacob Rees-Mogg tweets associations with the AFD, which is an established party that is racist, when people like Forrest Johnson forge links with Steve Bannon, who's been quite bold and brave about being a white supremacist. This, for me, is not a joke, because I think if you are a minority, there's a sense in which history feels like it's repeating itself. And actually, let us not forget that it's not, real extreme, nasty fascists and racists. In this country, we've got people like Tommy Robinson. They usually have the cover of mainstreamers who don't go quite as far as they would go, but adopt some of the language. That's what history tells us. And so with all integrity, it's important that there are parliamentarians standing up to that. And I think it's important for me to do that and not to be cowed by somehow you can't say this or you can't say that. Absolutely not. On behalf of the people I represent, Seven Sisters.
You think it's fair then? You think you're concerned enough that you would put the ERG in the same bracket as Nazi Germany in terms of the way you feel things are going?
I'm saying that we should not appease hard right instincts in the Conservative Party that have adopted and taken over the entire agenda and have led us to this sorry place. That's what I'm saying, absolutely. And my view is that there are extremists beyond them, of course, very dangerous, who seem to feel emboldened. Hate crime rising, a sort of viciousness that you see in our political language. And let me just be fair, because I want to be fair, at this extreme time, there are also people in my own party, the anti-Semites, and a kind of nasty hard left tradition also that I want to resist. So that's what I'm standing up against. I'm standing up against that extremism that seems to be dominating the political landscape and squeezing out most of us that can find common ground, actually, whatever our political tradition, and are sitting in the centre of the British political system.
Do you ever get tired of it always being you who has to stand up? Because you do stand up for all sorts of things.
Yeah, well...
do you ever feel as though it would be quite nice if someone else piped up and said, actually, I'm a bit worried about racism in whatever form it might be? Or...
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that question. I do a bit. I sometimes get concerned that people say, thank you for being so passionate, and thank you for being so brave. I'm like, hang on a minute. Shouldn't every MP be doing this at this time, from whatever tradition they see themselves as from? And I certainly think that the concern that I have for minorities, which is, I think, is obviously a democratic concern. One should always, the more civilised a country is, the better it treats its minorities, whether they are sexual minorities, whether they have disabilities, or whether they are ethnic minorities. And I obviously find myself defending those minorities, because if we lived in a world where no one spoke up for these people, I'm afraid their interests would be easily forgotten.
Let's get one other little controversy out of the way, which was the comic relief issue the other week. Again, just to remind people, you were concerned about the way Comic Relief presents some of its videos, and sort of, I think you said that the celebrities sort of going out there being white saviours, and you were tweeting Stacey Dooley about it. And Comic Relief donations dropped this year. I mean, do you feel at all responsible for having created a storm that potentially might have contributed to that fall in donations?
No, I don't. I was raising a really important point that and I don't mind being the lightning rod sometimes for important points like this, but what is the fundamental point? The fundamental point is that we all celebrate charity and aid and lifting people and assisting people as they battle with poverty and hardship. But it is important for each generation to ask hard questions about how we do that. And I'm afraid it is a trope to walk into a village, to pick up a child, to have that child's image all around the world, to use celebrities in this way and to give no agency. Where's the child's parent? What's the child's story? Who was consulted? Would you want your children picked up in that way? You would be outraged, actually, if someone from another country did that. And so when we engage in charity, it's not about bigging up ourselves, and it's not about disempowering others. It's about working alongside others and empowering others. And Comic Relief does tremendous work on the ground, but some of the way it's fundraised needs change. And 30 years ago, it was all great. But here in 2019, there are a lot of my constituents who switch off, either because they're from African descent or just they don't want their children exposed to these images of Africa that give people the impression that there is no middle class in Africa, that there aren't African charities doing great work, and actually more than that, that there aren't Africans sitting all around the world who send way more money to Africa than Comic Relief ever raises. And so Comic Relief did lose money this year. Comic Relief has lost money since 2011.
True. And
that may be about the way that they fundraise. And it's important to put Comic Relief in perspective. Comic Relief's contribution to aid is nothing like the 0.7% that British taxpayers give to DFID. It's tiny in comparison to the taxpayers' funding, and of course it's quite small in relation to other charities like Oxfam, Save the Children and others. So let us keep it in perspective and let us understand that it is important to challenge charities sometimes. We saw this with Oxfam too, because the governance and the scrutiny of charities is a lot less than, say, of journalists or indeed of members of parliament.
Thank you for that. But it would be a shame, though, wouldn't it, if donations had dropped by a bit? I mean, you wouldn't want there to be any less money for Africa, would you? In whatever form it takes.
I think that probably if people don't give to Comic Relief, they will give to other charities that they think are more deserving of their funds that year. So in the end, I want to say also that I'm not sitting here as a Victorian philanthropist. I think that there's obviously a position for charity, but actually it's people themselves that do a lot to lift themselves up out of poverty. It's governments, taxpayers, and other things that have to come together. So I don't think it's all about charitable endeavour, and that's almost become too dominant, that people believe that these children will not be able to get out of poverty unless they sort of text or give funds. And it's a little bit more complicated than that, and we need to get back to the campaigns like Make Poverty History that were about governance, that were about trade, and a whole set of other things that assist in that journey out of poverty. It's not just about money from your pocket. Okay, great. Let's get back to you being Prime Minister now, and you've got to make your first speech. So what do you think, it's quite easy with you because you're so clear about what you believe in, but what would you draw on as your kind of... And there are politicians who aren't.
I suppose not everyone's as free to speak so openly as you, but what would be the kind of personal anecdote, the backstory that you would draw on to give us a sense of what you believe in as a Prime Minister, do you think? How would you present your package as a Prime Minister? Well, everything I have, I owe in a large measure to this country, to tremendous teachers, lecturers, youth workers in my own life in Tottenham and Peterborough, where I went to school. I think of my family and my mixed heritage children and my wife's family, and that is a huge tribute to this country. That's the best of Britain. Mm-hmm. It's a Britain that was on show when we won the Olympics. And that's the Britain that I really want to stand up for. It's not just a Britain in London, by the way. I have family in Ludlow, Chichester, Birmingham, Edinburgh, all over the country. But it's that endeavour on other people's behalf. It's multicultural.
it's myriad in background, it's generous, it's honest, and I think of those teachers that really helped me be the best I could be. And ultimately, despite coming from a poor background, raised by a single mother, they helped me get to Harvard Law School, become a lawyer, and become an MP. And that's what I want for all young people in this country. We've got a bit of a way to go, I think, and I want us to get back to that energy and verve that's ambitious, optimistic, and hopeful. And I think at the moment, obviously, things are a bit negative.
Do you think we're within touching distance of having a Prime Minister who's not white, quite frankly? Do you think we're almost there with that kind of social mobility and that kind of diversity? Do you think we're anywhere near that?
Well, for me, diversity is a bit broader than just if you're an ethnic minority.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I want to put this? I want to see a Prime Minister who's come from a housing estate in Sunderland. I want to see a Prime Minister that could have come from the 22nd floor of Grenfell Tower.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of this story is about, can you achieve in Britain to the highest standard, whatever your background? And I think there are still obstacles, white or black, when you're from a poorer background, if you're a single parent. So I can't remember the last Prime Minister we had with a northern accent, let alone ethnic minority. And of course there are ethnic minorities these days that are very well off and went to top schools like Eton and other things. So yes, of course there could be that kind of Prime Minister. But for me, when I talk about diversity, there's a sort of slightly bigger breadth to that. And you know, when I campaign on issues like Brexit, I really want to emphasise that whilst, of course, quite understandably, as one of the only visible ethnic minority MPs, there is a lot where I have to champion those causes. But I am absolutely as concerned about people who are in a seaside town, can't get up the ladder, can't seem to find the money to care for their family, the industrial north. You know, there's so much in common, I think, on that agenda, and that's in the end what I want to champion and speak up for.
So you can pass any bill as Prime Minister, or you can introduce any bill as Prime Minister, and let's assume you've got a significant majority, so you can get it through the Commons. What would be the first thing you'd really want to do you think?
Oh, policy-wise, there's lots to do. Oh, there's lots to do.
What do you think would be your priority, though?
I think that there are real issues of inequality. I think that there's a generation of baby boomers. They're older than me, and they're certainly older than you. They've still got the levers of power, and many of them, not all of them, but many of them have made a hell of a lot of money on the property market, certainly here in London and the South East. I do think there's got to be a land value tax. I do think there's got to be reform to council tax. It's got to be on the value of your property when you sell it. And that would raise a lot of money, because we've got to find ways of redistributing that funds back to a younger generation that can't get on the property ladder. People who need council housing that are never going to be able to afford the huge cost of housing here in London. So there's definitely, for me, some changes in taxation around land and those that have made gains, including myself, by the way, as Generation X, that we've got to find ways of getting that money back to the millennials and to a younger generation to create a much fairer, it feels to me, society in an age where there's clearly going to be a bit less money to go around.
In terms of practicalities then, what kind of policies would you put in place to do that?
So you need a land value tax.
Yeah.
You also need to help people up the ladder, to take up those jobs that do exist in the economy, but at the moment go to people either arriving from abroad with skills or people who've been lucky to go to fancy universities and fancy schools. I want to bring back night schools. My mother, when my father left, was encouraged to go back to night school to help care for a family of 5. And it helped to change my life. And I think there are too many people, whether they're in a seaside town or a market town, who you can't expect to go to university. I mean, 1, it costs a fortune, and 2, they've got a day job. They need night schools, not grammar schools, night schools. So I'd invest in night schools. There's another area that I care a lot about: young people. And these are young people who aren't lucky enough to go to fancy public schools, who've got great playing grounds and great playing fields. I want to see us investing again in youth services for those young people after school. I want to see an explosion in sport of the kind that you see if you're in America or in Australia. A bigger contribution to the arts and drama at a local civic level. Investment in young people to do meaningful things outside of school. And let me tell you something controversial that I would want to see introduced, and that is a compulsory civic service. Not a military service, but I worry that if you're in Scunthorpe growing up and you don't go to university, and if you're in Tottenham growing up and you don't go to university, you're never really going to meet. You're never going to have a sense of this country, and you're probably not going to get the opportunity to much endeavour on behalf of the country and others. And so I think we have got a citizens service, but it's not a compulsory one. I think we've got to think again about how we bring the country together, particularly in a post-Brexit environment.
Okay, all right, interesting. A substantial agenda for government there.
You can see I've been thinking about it.
Yeah, I think you might. Maybe you have been using that hairbrush in the mirror after all. Right, quick fire round now. Some simple questions just to finish this off.
Oh, God, come on. They're never simple questions.
Oh, they are simple questions. Come on, for a politician. Would you abolish the House of Lords?
Actually, strangely, no. I'm not sure I would abolish the House of Lords. I think the House of Lords does a good job scrutinising the Commons, and the reason they do it is because we're not a bunch of, elected politicians with party lists, party placements, dividing lines. Now, there's some reform because I want it to continue to be a house of experts. So I think there are ways in which journalists could vote to send their best journalists, doctors could vote to send their best doctors. You want the experts in the field, but I'm not as convinced by others. I know I'm not meant to say this as a Labour politician, that you should just abolish it and replace it with another bunch of elected politicians. I worry about that.
Okay, interesting. Would you expel Brunei from the Commonwealth?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, that was a simple one.
Absolutely. They need to be kicked out sharpish. Stoning people because of whom they love in 2019 is totally out with of the best values of the Commonwealth, which are about tolerance, fairness, and human rights. And Brunei, I'm afraid, have stepped out of that norm. And if they refuse to step back in, they should be suspended.
Let's look at some lighter issues as well. How would you de-stress as Prime Minister? What do you like doing? What are your hobbies?
So my staff know that I'm obsessed with film.
Okay.
I love going to the cinema. And so sometimes, in between votes, if they can't get me on the phone or can't find me, they usually have to break into the Victoria Curzon Cinema to get me out, because I love going to the cinema. I also love theatre. Any kind of drama I'm obsessed with, basically.
What kind of films do you like? Thrillers or anything?
Dramas, really. Human stories.
What have you seen lately that you really loved?
Oh God, I didn't even going to ask me that, and I'm like, got to now recount.
Did you see The Favourite?
No, I did see The Favourite.
Yeah, that was a good film, right?
I generally see all the Oscar contenders
Okay.
on the whole, so I absolutely saw The Favourite. Recently, I saw that wonderful film with Julia Roberts about struggling with a son who had a drug addiction problem. You can see these are very happy films, but they're big.
I haven't seen this one. I can't help you.
That I tend to go and watch.
Okay, all right. So big cinema lover. Where would you go on holiday as Prime Minister? Do you think? Where do you like to go on holiday?
The Caribbean.
Yeah.
I am very, very happy in the blue waters of the Caribbean, with sand under my feet, usually with my wife and kids, and I can be, a beach, St Lucia, Barbados, and indeed Guyana, where my own parents are from. I try to get back to with the family on a regular basis.
Okay, sounds good. What would your Downing Street pet be? Do you like animals?
I'm trying to persuade my wife that we need a dog.
Okay.
We have 3 children. My youngest is 5. I would like 4 children, maybe 5. but I think that's unlikely. So it is a dog.
So the dog will be the fourth child.
And we're thinking of a Labrapoodle or a little Cocker Spaniel, or I mean anyone who's got tips as to the best kind of dog I should have with kids. I'd like all of those recommendations.
Didn't
please.
the Obamas have a Labradoodle? Was it a
I think
Labradoodle?
didn't they have a what do they call it, a Chavrapoo or a Charapoo?
Cockapoo?
Cockapoo? I don't know.
I'm not very good on dog breeds either. This isn't going very well.
Yeah.
What would your song be at party conference, do you think, if you had to come out and dance to something Theresa May style?
Oh my God!
Do you reckon you're a better dancer than Theresa May?
I'm quite a good dancer
Are you?
actually, but I'm not going to show my moves on ITV. I don't make those headlines. What would my song? I keep thinking of Things Can Only Get Better, because that was obviously the campaign theme
Oh,
in
yeah.
1997, and so that's ringing around my head. I don't
Back to
know
those
what-
heady days of Tony Blair.
What current grime tracks I should sort of introduce into this conversation. Maybe a Stormzy number of some sort.
Okay, all right. I think, to be honest, you've answered all my questions. So thank you very much.
Okay,
thank
great.
you very much for
Thank you.
having us into your office, and thanks for coming on Acting Prime Minister. You've been a fascinating Prime Minister of the afternoon.